Nowadays, the sordid adventures of Peaky Blinders' Shelby family are a major TV phenomenon. But just how much does the show draw from history? Well, from small-time razor gangs to criminal warlords, here's the real-life background of Peaky Blinders. Over the course of the show, the Peaky Blinders have made use of many weapons, from pistols and rifles to huge military-grade machine guns. But they started the show with one of their most notorious weapons, the razor blades that they hid in their hat brims, allowing them to slash enemies in the face. Unfortunately, historian Carl Chin suggests that this novel yet brutal weapon is almost certainly nothing but a myth. When the real Peaky Blinders roamed Birmingham, razor blades were still a luxury item that was well beyond their financial means, and the weapons they actually used were far more practical than a novelty hat. Of course, according to popular myth, the gang got its name from the bladed blinding peaks of their caps. Unfortunately, since their razor caps most likely didn't exist, this is basically inaccurate. Chin says that the Peaky Blinders probably got their name because they like to wear peaked caps, and blinder was likely just a slang term for their fancy clothing. Still, it's understandable why the show went with the razor blade story. After all, it's far cooler to imply that the Blinders went around wearing deadly hats than to admit they just liked nice waistcoats. An important theme in Peaky Blinders is the hidden frailty of its macho hard-as-nails heroes. The central Shelby siblings, Arthur and Tommy, are both veterans of World War I and have seen and experienced things that they're still struggling to cope with.
I thought you were all right.
Yeah, well, I don't think I am. Sorry.
The showrunners have made it extremely clear that Tommy in particular is struggling with a pretty bad case of post-traumatic stress disorder. However, there's just one little problem with all this. The Peaky Blinders weren't World War I veterans. The real Peaky Blinders' heyday was in the 1890s as opposed to the show's 1920s, which means there were precisely 0 world wars around to traumatize them. By the time the events of Peaky Blinders takes place, the real Blinders were already a thing of the past. Their main area of operations, Small Heath, had grown larger, and the gang members drifted apart as they grew older and found better things to do with their lives. While the central Shelby family behind Peaky Blinders might be entirely fictional, the world they live in is populated by very real historical figures. Take Tom Hardy's larger-than-life Jewish gangster Alfie Solomons for one. It's easy to think of him as a colorful villain character who was thought up by some screenwriter, but Solomons really did exist, and seems to have operated much like he does in the show. However, Peaky Blinders creator Stephen Knight has admitted that Solomon's exact personality is based on legend, due to lack of precise information about the real gangster. But Solomon's isn't the only real-life figure in Peaky Blinders. Major antagonists Billy Kimber and Darby Sabini were both very real gangsters of the era, as was Season 5's drug kingpin Brilliant Chang, who in real life was a restaurant owner and a powerful criminal known as the Dope King of London. The British fascist politician Oswald Mosley was a real person too. And then there's this guy who, well, he's kind of obvious.
I really must come up to Birmingham someday and spend an evening with your family. They sound interesting.
Yep, Winston Churchill was definitely a real guy. Even Charlie Chaplin, a Birmingham native, pops up at one point. However, thanks to the show's loose time frame, many of these famous real characters have been shoehorned into the show via ways in which they'd never have been able to interact with the historical Blinders. Stylish 1920s fashion is a huge part to Peaky Blinders' appeal. In an interview with Clothes on Film, costume designer Stephanie Colley revealed the secret to the show's sartorial allure, staying faithful to the time period but giving it a slight Hollywood twist in order to make the clothes appealing to the modern viewer's eye. The main character's suits are tailored for one, and Cillian Murphy's Tommy Shelby usually forgoes ties for a stiff collar, something a man from his time period would never do. Some quirks were dropped from the show, such as the bell-bottom pants and silk scarves that the real Blinders had an affinity to. The men's haircuts were inspired by the book Crooks Like Us, which feature photos of Australian convicts. One thing that might appear period accurate is the way in which the characters constantly smoke cigarettes. Cillian Murphy alone has gone through an estimated 5,000 cigarettes over the course of his time filming the show. But even they're just a little off. Since smoking is obviously forbidden on set, the darts Murphy and his co-stars are habitually holding are actually herbal rose cigarettes, and they avoid inhaling the smoke. As Helen McCrory jokingly puts it, no actors were killed in the making of Peaky Blinders. While the real Peaky Blinders operated before World War I and thereafter, well before the show takes place, the writers of Peaky Blinders aren't being totally inaccurate by placing such a powerful gang in 1920s Birmingham. There really was a powerful post-war gang in the area, sporting a clear leadership structure and waging war with some of the gangsters the Blinders feud with in the show. In fact, just like the gang on the show, this group also built their empire on horse racing and gambling. So why didn't they use that gang instead of yanking the Peaky Blinders out of their rightful place in history? According to historian Carl Chin, it's because the Blinders name is shrouded in gangster legend. Meanwhile, the actual gang making moves in Birmingham after the Great War were called the Brummagem Boys, and later simply the Birmingham Gang, both names which don't exactly inspire awe or terror in a modern audience. But at least a version of the real-life gang gets a nod on the show as the Birmingham Boys, an early group of antagonists who, just like they were in real life, are led by a man named Billy Kimber. In Peaky Blinders, Billy Kimber is killed by Tommy Shelby in 1919. But in reality, Kimber, who actually died in 1945, was as close to being Tommy Shelby as any real-life gangster ever came. The real Kimber was a charismatic Birmingham criminal who was essentially a less traumatized version of Tommy Shelby. An intelligent, ruthless man and a resourceful fighter, Kimber was a veteran of Birmingham gang life and World War I. After the Great War, he began leading the Birmingham gang as the group expanded their criminal enterprise, and just like Tommy Shelby, Kimber ended up becoming the biggest gangster in the country. He even took his operations to London and moved into wider circles, in the same way as Tommy does on the show. But there are some differences. Kimber was a deserter, while Tommy Shelby was a war hero, and Kimber didn't become a member of parliament like Tommy did either, instead beginning a new life as a gangster in America, and later starting a legitimate racecourse business. Still, there are enough similarities there to raise an eyebrow or two. Here's a pretty obvious fact. The gang members in Peaky Blinders are grown-ups who tend to know exactly what they're doing when they get up to no good. However, real Peaky Blinders recruited members who were much younger than you might expect. In fact, the Birmingham gang's most prominent members included David Taylor, age 13, and Charles Lambourne, who was just 12 years old. Of course, there were also older Peaky Blinders who obviously wielded more power than the tween section of the gang. Still, the kids were far from mere hang-around members who were just pretending to be gangsters. They got into gang business just like their elders did. For instance, one reason we know about the young David Taylor was that he was eventually arrested and jailed for possession of an illegal firearm. But hey, that's Birmingham for you. A central tenet to the Peaky Blinders story is that the titular gang doesn't just fight hard, it fights smart. The assorted Shelbys and their associates are almost invariably clever, with Tommy and Aunt Polly arguably leading the group's scheming. And then there's Arthur Shelby. Tommy's big brother is the most brutal fighter of the Peaky Blinders, but also the least likely to come up with any plan that's any more complex than beating people up. And the real Blinders were basically a gang of Arthurs, minus the ambition. They were ruthless, indiscriminate criminals who targeted pretty much everyone and were mostly only legendary because of their physical fighting prowess. While that might have done them wonders on the mean streets of Birmingham, it's probably safe to say that the introduction of a few ambitious power broker characters has done wonders for the show. Many key members of the Peaky Blinders gang find themselves frequently at odds with the law. Apart from their many run-ins with Sam Neill's Inspector Campbell during the first 2 seasons, several members frequently run the risk of a dawn appointment with a noose. But the coppers didn't have much time for the real-life Peaky Blinders. In fact, court reports of the era mostly write them off as foul-mouthed young men who stalk the streets in drunken groups, insulting and mugging passers-by. While they reportedly did make some money from running protection rackets, betting, and black market operations, the arrest papers of the real Peaky Blinders don't exactly make them look like master criminals. Actual blinders such as Harry Fowler, Ernest Bales, Stephen McKickey, and Thomas Gilbert were arrested for such heinous crimes as breaking and entering, false pretenses, and bicycle theft. But then, following a drunken Arthur Shelby as he hijacks a bicycle and plows it into a canal doesn't exactly sound like a fine hour of television. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.